what Dr. King gave us, what Stokely Carmichael gave us, what Malcolm X gave us, what everybody gave us, whether you agreed with them or not. The energy of that time and the goals that we were all aspiring to, I think, is what it was all about at its best. At its worst, it was when we did nothing.
Black people are dissatisfied. They're dissatisfied not only with the white man, but they're dissatisfied with these Negroes who have been sitting around here posing as leaders and spokesmen for black people and actually making the problem worse instead of making the problem better.
I'm tired of marching. Tired of marching for something that should have been mine at birth.
We want change! We want change! We want change! We want change! We want change!
Many days I would come home and I would think about all the liberals that got on the buses and went south when for sit-ins and boycotts in the South. I really would come home and wonder, you know, where were they now?
Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live.
By the mid-1960s, the civil rights movement had changed the laws that divided us by race. But the struggle for unity was far from done.
Just because I'm white doesn't mean that the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to me either. I am white and I want my rights.
We look at Miss America, we see white. We look at Miss World, we see white. We look at Miss Universe, we see white. Even Tarzan, the king of the jungle in back Africa, he's white.
It's beautiful! Freedom! Said our warriors free! Freedom! Freedom!
Black Panthers preach every day, hate, kill Whitey, kill the police, kill the pigs, hate, hate, hate. That's all you hear from them.
We don't hate nobody because of their color. We hate oppression. We hate murder of black people in our communities. We hate the gross unemployment that exists in our communities. We hate black men being taken off into the military service.
Sergeant, you've just recently returned from Vietnam. Would you tell us how it feels to have to come from one zone of combat in a foreign land to one in your own land?
It's not a good feeling, not one I'm kind of proud of.
We stand on the eve of a black revolution, brothers. Masses of our people are in the streets. The rebellions that we see are merely dress rehearsals for the revolution that's to come.
Are you going to live outside of the American culture? Or are you going to live within it? As long as you stay in America, you've got to conform. What else can you do?
We won't go back! We won't go back!
This television series chronicles a period of history when our nation stood at a racial crossroads. A time when Americans struggled to define what was truly meant by liberty and justice for all. It was a time for anger and fear. A time when a gain for blacks was sometimes seen as a loss for whites.
Are the people of Cleveland willing to vote for a candidate for mayor who has the best qualifications, but whose skin does happen to be black?
We pick our lipsticks by color, sometimes our dresses, but we don't vote that way. We study the candidates.
I believe that.
It was also a time for triumph. A time when victory blurred the color line. A time when once again, America struggled to be America for all of its citizens.
When we come together, what time is it? When we respect each other, what time is it? When we get our self-confidence, what time is it?
It's nation time. It's nation time. It's nation time. You could hear reverberating all those pride struggles from the 40s and the 30s and the 50s and the 60s. I mean, came to be fulfilled in that moment of crying that it's nation time. Now,
I know the one thing we did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on.
less than 2% of the Negro people in Harlem have taken an active part in the civil rights struggle. We observed that there have been other groups out on the streets. The nationalists have been out on the streets, the Muslims have been out on the streets, but the NAACP, up to this point, has not been out there where the people are at.
All over America, there's not one black citizen in the United States. I defy Dr. Bunch or Martin Luther King to tell me that they're citizens of this no-good country, because integration will never happen. You'll never, as long as you live, integrate into the white man's system.
In the early 1960s, on inner-city street corners in the North, many groups competed for the hearts and minds of Black America.
All praise is due to Allah. Hey, everybody in Harlem is a Muslim.
One of the groups attracting the largest crowds was the Nation of Islam.
We, too, have been taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that we were stripped of everything we had and been cast into the fiery furnace, a land where they've been making it hot as hell for us for 400 years.
The Nation of Islam was a religious organization. Its approach to teaching black pride and self-reliance often provoked controversy. In major cities across the country, the nation built temples for prayer, established businesses to encourage economic independence in black communities, and created schools to educate its children. Members of the Nation of Islam were sometimes referred to as black Muslims. Their God was Allah, and his messenger was Elijah Muhammad.
The so-called American Negro have to be completely re-educated. He have to be completely made over again. And the condition that he is now in, he's not fit for self. And Islam gives him that qualification that he can feel proud and does not feel ashamed to be called a black man or a member of the black nation.
Elijah Muhammad successfully rehabilitated many convicts and drug addicts, teaching discipline and self-respect.
I quit taking drugs in 1958 after I heard the program of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. This is the only thing that ever gave me the inspiration or the strength not to use narcotics.
That's right.
And he opened the door for me to show me that some of the good things of this earth could be mine.
Right.
With just a little effort.
Right.
And following him.
That's right.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad doesn't condemn the victim. He goes to work on the victim. He doesn't say that all...
One of the converts was Malcolm X, who would soon transform the Nation of Islam. He was born Malcolm Little. His father was an organizer for black nationalist Marcus Garvey. After the father's violent death, which many believed to be a lynching, and the subsequent breakup of his family, the young Malcolm drifted into a life of drugs and crime. In 1946, he was convicted of burglary and sentenced to 10 years in prison, where he was introduced to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. After his release, he became a Muslim minister, and through street corner rallies, brought many new members into the Nation of Islam.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that it is time for you and me to stand up for ourselves. It is time for you and me to see for ourselves. It is time for you and me to hear for ourselves. And it is time for you and me to fight for ourselves. We don't need anybody today speaking for us, seeing for us, or fighting for us. We'll fight our own battles with the help of our God.
So the first time I actually saw him was in the mosque in Harlem one Sunday afternoon as he preached one of his sermons. And he described how we, as black folks, smelled. He described how we looked. He described how we felt. And then he described what caused us to feel that way. You know, the chains of slavery are still in your minds and in your heads, and you look at the white man and you love him. That's what you do. You hate the fact that he let you go from slavery. You want to go back there, you know. But no, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is here now, and we're gonna change all that. You know, the righteous black man is on the scene, and we're not gonna be satisfied with you and your shucking and jiving. The time has come.
In 1959, the media discovered the Nation of Islam.
While city officials, state agencies, white liberals, and sober-minded Negroes stand idly by, a group of Negro dissenters is taking to street corner stepladders, church pulpits, sports arenas, and ballroom platforms across the United States to preach a gospel of hate that would set off a federal investigation if it were preached by Southern whites.
Lou Lomax, a reporter I'd never heard of, came to my office, told me about something called the Black Muslims. I'd never heard of them. Would we be interested in doing a broadcast, a documentary about them? I suggested that, yeah, we might. Let's learn more about them. One of the conditions of our doing the broadcast, he said, was they will not talk to a white reporter.
This is the first time I think my color has ever been in my favor rather than against me, but on the whole, I would say that this assignment was a little rough.
Assigned a white camera crew, Lomax filmed this rally in Washington, D.C. The program included a performance of a play by Louis X called The Trial, in which whites are tried for their offenses against blacks.
I charge the white man, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, with being the greatest murderer on earth. I charge the white man with being the greatest liar on earth. I charge the white man with being the greatest troublemaker on earth. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you, bring back a verdict of guilty as charged.
When Lou Lomax came back with a film of the rally, the Black Muslim rally, I was simply stunned. I mean, here was this auditorium overflowing, thousands of people, about an organization I knew nothing about. I found it difficult to credit when I saw it.
Have you ever been accused, sir, of preaching hate?
Yes.
Do you think you are preaching hate?
No.
What are you preaching, sir?
Truth?
They call Mr. Muhammad a hate teacher because he makes you hate dope and alcohol. They call Mr. Muhammad a black supremacist because he teaches you and me not only that we're as good as the white man, but better than the white man. Yes, better than the white man. You are better than the white man. And that's not saying anything. That's not saying, you know where just to be equal with him. Who is he to be equal with? You look at his skin. You can't compare your skin with his skin. While your skin look like gold beside his skin. You find that old pale thing laying out in the sun, trying to get to look like you. That old pale thing.
In 1963, Malcolm X became national spokesman for the Nation of Islam.
Find them using man pain, trying to look like you. That old pale thing.
I was standing on the island there, looking at him, and my friend said, I'm going back to the office, we're going back. And I said, I'm going to stay because I like the rain. It was this kind of quiet drizzle that was happening there.
Hope you're not getting too wet.
And I looked up and looked around, determined not to look at him, determined not to listen. But he started to talk, and I found myself more and more listening to him. And I began to nod my head and say, yeah, that's right, that makes sense.
You don't have any dope for airplanes bringing drugs into this country. The white man brings it in. The white man brings it to Harlem. The white man makes you a drug addict. The white man then puts you in jail when he catches you using drugs. In a vicious cycle of poverty, of ignorance, of apathy, of disease, and of death. And they have these old Uncle Tom Negro leaders coming to Harlem telling you and me that times are getting better. Your times will never get better until you make them better.
When he came off the stage, I jumped off the island, walked up to him, And of course, when I got to him, the bodyguards, you know, moved in front, and he just pushed them away. And I went in front of him and extended my hand and said, I liked some of what you said. I didn't agree with all that you said, but I liked some of what you said. And he looked at me, held my hand in a very gentle fashion, and says, one day you will, sister.
As his reputation grew, Malcolm X began to write a book with Alex Haley.
When I began to interview Malcolm for the book that would later be called The Autobiography of Malcolm X, he would talk about the greater glories of Mr. Elijah Muhammad, his leader, and about the Nation of Islam, and there was nothing else he would talk about. And finally, I began very delicately as I could to say to him, Mr. Malcolm, this book is to be about you. So I know about them, you've told me, I've written with you about them, but we need now to go into your life. And he would always get first testy about it, and then he got distinctly annoyed about it, and finally he would get angry. I said, Mr. Malcolm, could you tell me something about your mother? And I will never, ever forget how he stopped, almost as if he was suspended like a marionette. And he said, I remember the kind of dresses she used to wear. They were old and faded and gray. And then he walked some more. And he said, I remember how she was always bent over the stove, trying to stretch what little we had. And that was the beginning, that night, of his walking. He walked that floor until just about daybreak.
Largely ignoring Elijah Muhammad, the media focused on Malcolm X, contrasting him with Martin Luther King Jr.
And it is a message which says that I am convinced that the most potent weapon available to oppress people as they struggle for freedom and justice is the weapon of nonviolence.
Amen. We're nonviolent with people who are nonviolent with us. But we are not nonviolent with anyone who is violent with us.
Malcolm X represented a different brand of leadership. Many of us that grew up in the South had been deeply influenced by the church, by the preaching of black ministers, but also by the message, the philosophy, the teaching of Martin Luther King Jr., the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. We saw Malcolm as someone, in a sense, from the outside, coming from the North, to tell us that was a different way, a different approach. And I think many of us in the South had some reservations about it.
Martin and the regular civil rights leaders were presenting to America our best face, our non-violent face, our desire to be included into American society. And we wanted to show the world that we had no evil intentions against anybody. We just wanted to be included. But they also understood that America, in spite of our reassurances, would be frightened and hesitant to open the doors to black folks. So Malcolm, as the outsider, as the man they thought represented the possibilities of violence, was the counter that they could use. They would say to the powers that be, look, here's Martin Luther King and all these guys, we are nonviolent. Now, outside the door, if you don't deal with us, is the other brother. And he ain't like us.
One white man named Lincoln supposedly fought the Civil War to solve the race problem, and the problem is still here. And then another white man named Kennedy came along running for president and told Negroes what all he was going to do for them if they voted for him, and they voted for him, 80%. He's been in office now for 3 years, and the problem is still here. When police dogs were biting black women and black children and black babies in Birmingham, Alabama, that Kennedy talked about what he couldn't do because no federal law had been violated. And as soon as the Negroes exploded and began to protect themselves and got the best of the crackers in Birmingham, then Kennedy sent for the troops. And there was no, he didn't have any new law when he sent for the troops. When the Negroes erupted, than he had at the time when whites were erupting.
In November 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. In the midst of national mourning, Elijah Muhammad suspended Malcolm X for his comments on the president's death.
This came about as a result of
statements in the press indicating or trying to imply that he had rejoiced over the assassination of President John Kennedy. A statement that Brother Malcolm had said at the time was that it was a case of the chickens coming home to roost. He had been saying all along that the violence, that whole violent atmosphere that had been created as a result of the movement, and by the government not doing anything about this, and in this case, Kennedy was the president at the time, they had created a whole atmosphere of violence, and finally this violence had reached the White House.
The relationship between Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam rapidly deteriorated.
During the 90 days that I've been silent, I have come to the conclusion that I can best help spread the solution and the diagnosis that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gives of the so-called Negro problem in this country by continuing to remain out of the Nation of Islam and working on my own without restriction in the way that I think I best know how.
He felt that he was now a big man before the public, and this seemed to have been his desire. He wanted to be seen and heard. He wanted to exalt himself above his teacher.
The Nation of Islam, as it is guided spiritually by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, doesn't involve itself in politics in any form because of its failure to become actively involved in the struggle of the Negroes overall. Many persons in the past have drifted away from it and are now becoming involved with us in an active effort to work with other groups toward solving the political, social, and economic evils that afflict our people.
Malcolm X now advanced his own program for Black Americans. He formed the Organization of Afro-American Unity, dedicated to the philosophy of black nationalism.
Which means that the black man should control the politics of his own community and control the politicians who are in his own community. My personal economic philosophy is also black nationalism, which means that the black man should have a hand in controlling the economy of the so-called Negro community. He should be developing the type of knowledge that will enable him to own and operate the businesses and thereby be able to create employment for his own people, for his own kind.
Malcolm X made 2 trips to Africa, including a pilgrimage to Mecca to become an Orthodox Muslim. His meetings with African leaders to seek their support attracted the attention of the U.S. Justice and State Departments.
Well, my purpose here is to remind the African heads of state that there are 22 million of us in America who are also of African descent, and to remind them also that we are the victims of America's colonialism or American imperialism, and that our problem is not an American problem, it's a human problem. It's not a Negro problem, it's a problem of humanity. It's not a problem of civil rights, but a problem of human rights.
What he ultimately was aiming for at a foreign policy level was to have the government, the U.S. government, have to defend its inaction in terms of the racist attacks that were going on at that time, to defend its actions before the UN Commission on Human Rights and take it before the World Court.
Malcolm, are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, please. I think you're right in my chairman. The audience will have to be quiet. Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that nations look, African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society.
Are you prepared to work with some of the leaders of the other civil rights organizations?
Certainly, certainly. We will work with any groups, organizations, or leaders in any way, as long as it's genuinely designed to get results.
Malcolm X received many threats, but an attempted poisoning in Africa made him believe the danger went beyond the Nation of Islam. On December 3rd, 1964, he took part in this debate in Oxford, England.
And I live in a society whose social system is based upon the castration of the black man, whose political system is based on castration of the black man, and whose economy is based upon the castration of the black man. They came up with what they call a civil rights bill in 1964, supposedly to solve our problem, and after the bill was signed, 3 civil rights workers were murdered in cold blood Civil rights bill down the drain. No matter how many bills pass, black people in that country, where I'm from, still our lives are not worth 2 cents. Well, anytime you live in a society supposedly based upon law, and it doesn't enforce its own law because the color of a man's skin happens to be wrong, then I say those people are justified to resort to any means necessary to bring about justice where the government can't give them justice.
Malcolm X's influence was strong among young people, especially for some members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
So many people in SNCC who didn't even know who Malcolm was began to sit up and take notice. So here in SNCC, it became first thought, right, Malcolm X is having an effect where you don't even think he's having an effect, so people began to look closer. Of course, the closer they looked to Malcolm X, the quicker they got hooked on Malcolm X.
Early in 1965, SNCC and Dr. Martin Luther King joined forces for a voting rights campaign in Selma, Alabama. When SNCC invited Malcolm X to speak in Selma, he reaffirmed his willingness to support other civil rights leaders.
And I think that the people in this part of the world would do well to listen to Dr. Martin Luther King and give him what he's asking for and give it to him fast before some other factions come along and try to do it another way. What he's asking for is right. That's the ballot. And if he can't get it the way he's trying to get it, then it's going to be got one way or the other.
On February 14, 1965, Malcolm X's home was bombed as he and his family slept inside.
Had you had any threats, anything like this?
Had any threats? That's all I get is threats. I get not less than 6 or 7 threatening phone calls every day.
And the phone rang, and I picked it up. It was a morning, and a Saturday morning, as I recall. And this voice came on and asked and started talking. And I'm wondering, who is it? I didn't understand. I didn't recognize the voice. And finally, something he said made me realize, with a great shock, my shock, that was Malcolm X. And for the first time in our whole acquaintance of years, I really didn't perceive who he was. The thing was, he was under such pressure that it was as if it had constricted his vocal cords. He just felt, I guess, as near desperate as I ever saw him, because, again, here's the image of the fearsome, indomitable Malcolm X. But bottom line was, he was a father, and he was a husband, and his wife and his daughters were imperiled. And what could he do about it?
My house was bombed. It was bombed by the black Muslim movement upon the orders of Elijah Muhammad.
But within the week, Malcolm X expressed doubt that the Muslims were responsible. He planned to speak again the following Sunday at the Audubon Ballroom.
I was going to the Audubon that day, had been out the night before reading, had gotten lazy, and had said simply, I'll go next week. And so proceeded to go into the kitchen, put some coffee on, turn on the radio. In my little apartment there, I had a little black and white kitchen table with these little black chairs. And I had this little black radio on that table. And I clicked the radio on as I stood there thinking about what had happened the night before. Turned towards the stove to pick up my coffee. And the flash came through on this station and said, Malcolm had been assassinated.
Malcolm X was killed by 16 gunshots fired at close range. He was 39 years old.
And my children were crying, you know, what's going on? What's going on? Are they going to shoot us? And I just knew they had shot him.
And that night we went into the Harlem community to walk and mingle with the people. There was a kind of sense of loss. And as we passed people, some who were even strangers, we would stop and greet each other and say what this man had meant to us.
He was a master teacher. And there is no greater loss to a community than the loss of a master teacher.
During the next 3 days, 20,000 people endured sub-freezing temperatures to say goodbye to Malcolm X.
When the funeral was over and Malcolm was stripped of his Western clothes, and then the Muslims came and dressed him for a proper Muslim burial, they had a service. The cemetery. And when we got there, you know, the professional grave diggers were standing there with their shovels, but some of the black brothers said, no, we can't let you do that. We dig this grave. You know, we cover this brother with dirt. And it was a moving moment. And I was proud at that moment to be black, and proud that my community and people, no matter what had been said by the outside world, said to the brother we loved and respected and admired you. And so we buried him. And there it is.
I woke up this morning when the man said our freedom.
Malcolm X had a far-reaching effect on the civil rights movement. In the South, there had been a long tradition of self-reliance. Malcolm X's ideas now touched that tradition.